from the heart of Dubai, where tomorrow is being built today, to the world. Welcome to the CTO Show with Mehmet. Here, we redefine technology and reimagine possibilities. With Mehmet, delve into the riveting realms of AI, cybersecurity, and digital technology. Experience the thrilling highs and lows of startups. Immerse yourself in the spirit of entrepreneurship and witness the future of business innovation being written in real time. Now, without further ado, let's tune in and explore the future.
Hello and welcome back to a new episode of the CTO Show with Mehmet. Today I'm very pleased to have with me Paul joining me from Portland, right?
Yeah, Portland, Oregon. Yep.
Yes. So, Paul, thank you very much for being on the show. The way I like to do it is I keep it to the guests to introduce themselves. So, tell us a bit about yourself and what you do.
Yeah, so I'm the CTO and one of the co-founders of ConductorOne, a simplest high level is a cybersecurity startup, and we're really in the kind of identity security space where we're helping manage what people can do inside an organization. It's kind of the authorization part of who you are inside a business. And my background was like very infrastructure, all the stuff underneath the clouds, that kind of work. And I kind of just found myself in security because I, saw security incidents and I was pretty unhappy with the outcomes. And that led me to starting a company, which I think is, I think you talk to a lot of people who start companies. It's from kind of
Yes.
seeing personal pain. And that's kind of how I got here.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Like, actually, so if you can like a little bit elaborate on the journey, because I'm curious
Yeah.
myself. So I was, in the infrastructure space. I started, configuring, servers and virtualization stuff and then cloud.
Yep.
So you mentioned like you saw some incidents. So what was, the trigger for you to shift to cybersecurity? Because by the way, cybersecurity, maybe you will agree or not, but it's not the funniest place to be in. So, so what brought you to cybersecurity space?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So I was working on open source software for a large company, and we were building kind of cloud infrastructure. And I was running the infrastructure teams there. And we saw security incidents at our company. And this was back near 2010, 2011. And the reaction of the company is what you're supposed to do at the time, which is you buy everything that's out there. You buy more VPNs. You put multi-factor everywhere. You put all kinds of agents and endpoints and all kinds of stuff try to lock everything down. The philosophy was like, we'll just make it more secure by making it harder for anyone to do anything. And it really had two outcomes that blew my mind. So first was the effectiveness. Unfortunately, like security incidents still happened. It wasn't like we did all this work, we spent millions of dollars, and there were no more security incidents. Like, so the outcomes weren't good. So I was like, that's weird. Like most of the time, if you buy a solution, like at least the outcomes work, right? And the second one that really bothered me. So my background was I would say like, I cared about like productivity and helping people be successful. And like that was my ethos, even in the infrastructure space, was it destroyed my team's productivity. Like we made it so hard to do work that like people didn't want to be on the corporate network in the office anymore. This is way before the pandemic. People were like, I'd rather work from home on my home internet connection because I can get my work done better. And that to me was one of my trigger points, really, that led to me starting my first company. But, it was like, how can we spend all this money and it like hurts productivity so much that people don't even want to come into the office anymore? Like that combination was what kind of shifted my career for now more than 10 years into kind of like, well, someone has to work on this security thing and make it not so terrible that people don't want to come into the office anymore.
Yeah, makes sense. Definitely. Now let's like a little bit dig more into this topic and talk about identity management. And you mentioned like basically it's about the way authentications happen and
Hmm.
what should who does what exactly. So if we want to highlight why it's important for organizations to adapt, because honestly speaking, I was reading a lot of articles previously and people like mix things sometimes, like, privileged access management
Hmm.
with identity management with, all these things. So
Yeah.
if you can like, of course, like high level dissect these ones and highlight the importance of each one and why the organizations today more than any time before, they should have all of them actually.
Yeah.
In.
Yeah. It is a little bit of alphabet soup, kind of the Gartners of the world have uh, chopped up the space into, a half dozen plus kind of alphabet soup of words. I think just from like first principles, you have to start with who someone is. And, it's normally called authentication with an N. And, that's who you are. But I think one of the important concepts there is many times that's, coupled with the device you're on as well. Right. So, um, in a physical analogy, you're like, oh, you show someone your, state issued ID or whatever when you enter a building. And that's your attestation of who you are. In a digital analogy, though, there might be a credential, like a password, or preferably a web authent token, like a YubiKey. Those are
Mhm.
better credentials. But it's also you're always coupled to the device you're on, right? It's not just you as a human. There's like a piece of machinery in between you and the whatever you're authenticating to. So you kind of have this device identity plays a role in a lot of zero trust philosophies. You know, we only trust corporate managed laptops and your password that, preferably is a good one. Um, and that's kind of the authentication part, and it's who you are. The next big bucket is kind of authorization, what you're allowed to do. In the physical analogy, it's, are you allowed to open every door in a building? Like, even if you are some, person, you're not allowed to go in every door in a building, right? So it's the authorization of what you're allowed to do at any given time. And I think, historically, a lot of organizations, you know, have been very loose with authorization, many times over privileging what you're allowed any user to do. Should the CEO of a company have access to everything in a company? I mean, kind of, except if you're a cyber attacker, you're like, well, if we hack the CEO, we have access to everything. But
Right.
the reality is, most CEOs don't need access to everything in the company all the time. And so there's a concept in there called least privilege and kind of temporary privilege access. This kind of gets into one of those uh, alphabet soup things of privilege access management, which is kind of how do you manage the most sensitive authorization? How do you dynamically change what you're allowed to access? So, if today you're deploying something on a server, you need access to that server. But if you're not doing that work tomorrow or or you're on vacation for 2 weeks, you don't need that access. And so there's an authorization part there, and it's challenging to get right. I think kind of the connective tissue on a lot of this is there's kind of a governance side. So if you hear the words IGA, identity governance, that's kind of managing the overall architecture. There are many different compliance regimes that different companies have to adhere to. So, in the US, if you have HIPAA or
Right.
SOC 2, there's a global set of standards you need to hit for various companies and industries. But generally, those compliance systems say you have to justify someone's access. You have to review their permissions every quarter or every year. There's different versions of this, but the basic idea is you don't kind of want scope creep. You want, I used to work with a guy in an old company and he started in support. He moved to project management. He later moved to engineering. He later moved to a technical operations role. He had access to everything, and like from a compliance point of view and a risk point of view, that's not great. If his account's compromised, you'd have access to everything in the company. And so that's usually there's some sort of governance apparatus over this whole thing that kind of manages who has what. It makes you recertify who has what. And so I say
Mhm.
those are the three big buckets. You could splice them, three or four big buckets. You could splice them into many subcategories. But it's like who you are, what you have access to, and then why you have access to things.
Right. Now, because you talked a lot about cloud poll, and this
Yeah.
is something, I'm sure we're seeing everywhere, by the way, and it doesn't tie to any geography, but people tend to think that when I move to the cloud, part of these things are taken care of, right? Which is not the case. So I like, Ben, you are a
Yeah.
CTO of a cybersecurity company. So people, please listen to Paul, what he will tell us about, why you should take care of these uh, three concepts that Paul explained. So Paul, what you tell
Yeah.
us about that?
Well, there is good news with the cloud. We do get a lot of rid of a lot of kind of legacy approaches and legacy protocols for how we authenticate, especially. So kind of on the authentication side, there's SSO protocols like SAML and OIDC. These are great and they help a lot because they remove a lot of having a different password for every app. And by and large, cloud applications are SSO enabled. Sometimes companies charge more for it, which is a different topic, the SSO tax. But by and large, the authentication part um, is becoming very commoditized and generally a protocol that most business apps support. And that is great because it does remove a significant problem. The challenge is, you know, the reality is with the explosion of cloud, every part of a business has, their 50 apps. If you go to a financial leader, they have NetSuite and 40 other cloud apps that runs the finance team. Same with the marketing team. They have their, 20 different ways to target ads or whatever. And the sales team has their CRM tool and then their, video recording tool. And like every part of the business actually has an explosion of cloud applications. And I don't think that's going backwards, by the way. I think it's one of the waves of kind of the next, decade is everyone's going to have a lot of niche apps in their business. Yes, there's going to be the big ones, Microsoft Cloud is going to be huge. But even if you go to someone's all in on Microsoft Cloud, they still have hundreds of other apps at scale. And so that sprawl, there's a couple of things that happen because of that. One is the knowledge of who should have what is distributed. In a traditional kind of centralized IT model, you kind of think IT knows all the answers. And that's really hard when you have all these different apps. IT barely knows about the app. It's going to be someone in the engineering department, knows what GitHub repositories an engineer should have. IT is very challenged to figure that out, especially when you multiply across all the apps, all the permissions different apps have. And so one of the challenges I think is just the volume of apps, the volume of different permissions you can have in that. And the reality is, from just a risk point of view, your company's data is in those apps. That's what makes them valuable. So a breach in a data breach in those apps can affect your business in a very material way. Now, I think there's some, silly apps out there. I don't know, a spell checker that's cloud based. I mean, does that really hurt your business if their spell checker has a data breach? Maybe not, but a lot of these apps have very sensitive data, and so that sprawl is like the fundamental problem. And the reality is there's no protocol that helps you here. Unlike the authentication space, where there's kind of this OIDC SAML protocols, in the authorization space, there's not a lot of options um, to just manage who has what in different apps because all the apps implement authorization their own way. And so that's really actually the conundrum that brought us to ConductorOne and starting the company was this sprawl is untenable. Um, so that's how we started the company. It was like, well, that's a big problem.
Yeah, it is a big problem indeed. So I understood, Paul, like you try also to automate part of this because
Hmm.
as you mentioned, so I used to work in the IT department and like and even I was doing consultancy for big customers. But at the end of the day, as you said, the number of systems, we're limited, right? So we know like there's a couple of databases, couple of
Yeah.
applications, a couple of, web facing servers here and there. But today, you have a large scale, as you said. So how important is automating, the security stack for such complex and hybrid environment?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it actually is a position that demands automation, which I think is a different level of scale. When to your point, not that long ago, I think a lot of IT departments kind of ran a few core systems, a few on-prem apps, and maybe you had one or two cloud things. But the reality is, when you have all these different systems, you have to use automation. Because here's the reality: most IT departments, the number of apps has doubled or tripled or gone up even more. Your headcount in the IT department is not. Like relative to the app growth, most IT departments, aren't doubling their headcount. And so I think that's one reality in the IT space is, you are resource constrained. You're actually human time constrained. And so to, hey, we're onboarding someone tomorrow. We have a new hire starting. You need to go to 50 different apps and invite them to the app. You know, like that takes a lot of time, a lot of time. And the other reality is, luckily, actually, in this decade, most apps have APIs, which I think is a big delta from 10, 15 years ago. APIs were hard. APIs were rare. Like we were still learning what it means to be a product with an API. And I think that's the other big thing that actually enables this automation, right? Where 10 or 15 years ago, even if you wanted to build automation, it was hard. Like some apps had APIs. Maybe you could, put together a PowerShell to script something together, but it was really hard. But now a lot more apps have APIs. And so I think that's the other kind of enabler in this is yes, there's an explosion of applications, but kind of as a reference architecture, you can go to any cloud app and say, hey, what's your API for adding a user or changing someone's permissions? And the reality is most apps have that already. And so that's the one enabler that I think it is the goodness out of this is that, yes, there's a insatiable demand for more applications. The good news is we kind of said, hey, apps are expected to have APIs. And one of those APIs is user management. And therefore you can do a lot of automation that just wasn't possible.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned at the beginning, Paul, about the concept of zero trust, and zero
Yeah,
trust is something mainstream now. Some people they say it's buzzword, right? But it's not. We know it's not. And sometimes, unfortunately, it's misused by vendor. But for example, for
sure.
someone like what you do, it's completely different. So now, if I'm a CISO today, right, and I'm evaluating, or let's say I'm trying to build a zero trust, what are the things that I should be focusing on from the experience that because you're talking to a lot of customers and
Yeah.
big customers, I know that for a fact.
Yeah. Well, my history with zero trust is a long one. My company I started in 2015 was doing zero trust before anyone knew what zero trust was. And uh, no one would listen to us. We're like, hey, there's this crazy idea out here. We're calling it zero trust. Um, I think in the modern context, we've kind of settled on a couple categories. So, um, there's a zero trust network access space, which, I think if you really simplify it down, it's a better VPN, and as silly as that sounds, that's helpful, right? Like having a better VPN, a software controlled, software defined VPN, that's a great building block. And that's good. And there are advantages to those products. I think the next kind of bucket is, um, you know, if you the root of zero trust was like we had these, basically network based firewalls with IP addresses for identity. That's bad. IP addresses are not a good proxy for identity. So we have zero trust network access. The next is kind of, in my opinion, is the proliferation of SSO and using SSO to drive access. And so there's products that kind of, let you use Okta or Azure AD to log into a database. Those are helpful because then you're out of the space of managing a password to access a database. And that's great. Um, and then I think the other spectrum of zero trust is kind of the last thing that is less figured out. I think is actually kind of the least privileged story. And if you go back to a lot of the early zero trust writings, some of the stuff from Google about Beyond Corp, um, and some of the original writings about zero trust, there's this embedded idea of least privilege that, any given person in your workforce shouldn't have access to everything in the company all the time. And that sounds really simple, but the tension there is productivity, right? If you lock everything down so no one can access anything, no one can do their job, right? So there's the innate tension there is productivity, and I think that's one of the ones that's the hardest actually for a lot of businesses to figure out is how do I restrict access to data in such a way that people are still productive, but my risk is diminished. And look, there's simple ones like, you know, everyone in the company doesn't need access to all your financials all the time. Like, okay, let's go implement that. But it's harder as soon as you get to like customer data or customer contracts or support dashboards. These are real hard challenges for businesses to figure out who should have access to what. And so I think in my mind, that's the most under delivered part of zero trust so far is figuring out how to at scale do least privilege. And I'll throw another buzzword in there. AI, I think, is actually somewhat helpful here, right? Like it's good at understanding large dimensionality data and things with mixed cardinality, and what I mean by that is you think about a company with tens of thousands of employees, they have tens of thousands of groups, and those groups are assigned access to resources and figuring out what groups do I even need, or who should be in what groups or who should have access to what. It's not a human scale problem, right? And and so I think that is one space where we will see more innovation in the next couple of years is can you leverage a lot of AI technology to help with this authorization problem? But again, the tension's still productivity. So no CSO, this is a challenge. No CSO wants to get in trouble because they revoked access to things, and support team couldn't do their job for a day. That's like not okay. And so there's a lot of kind of deployment hurdles there to make it successful.
Yeah. Now, Paul, how we are seeing, the adoption of, because IT started to, I remember like when I started my career, everything was, getting centralized, getting,
Hmm.
the things. Now we are seeing a trend of actually relying on, third parties to do even our SOC analysis,
Hmm.
right? Now, and coming back to your point about access, so what are you seeing, big enterprise and even like small, medium businesses, what are they doing to make this balance between, you're giving your soul to someone actually to defend you from one side, but at the same side, you're faced with, overwhelmed, issues,
Yep.
security related or not security related, plus lack of skilled workers, I would say, in the field of
Yeah.
cybersecurity. So what are you seeing, like big enterprises and clients you talk to doing in this space?
Yeah. So there is a definitely decentralization. I prefer the word democratization, maybe, but it's hard, but it's in my mindset, it's really about enablement. So as the central IT or even central security departments or central compliance departments, you want to create a golden path for your business units to be successful on, right? If you color within these lines, you will be successful. And so, from my point of view, a lot of times it is, look, here's our authentication solution. It's cloud based, it has all the protocols, it plugs into every app. Here's our authorization management strategy where, hey, if it has um, customer data in it, whatever this app is, we need to look at who has access to that every quarter. We're going to do that from a compliance point of view. If it doesn't have customer data in it, or if it, um, you know, I don't know, is some silly tool, like we'll look at it once a year. So you can kind of, from my point of view, it's about setting the policies and kind of the control regimen over these systems, but not actually having to own the systems themselves, which is you're there to enable the team to adopt something and then say, hey, to adopt it in the best way, here's the few things you need to do and make it a checklist that a business unit can achieve. And that's why I see both large and small businesses are kind of moving towards. It is a service orientation of helping your business be successful. And there's saying, look, here's the important things we need to control is who people are, what they have access to, and how we make sure that's the actual state of things.
Yeah, makes sense. And I like the word, democratization of that instead of decentralization. Yeah, 100%. I agree with you on this. Now, um, maybe a little bit, we here not related directly to cybersecurity in the
Yeah,
sense of the technology, but from a CTO perspective, Paul, what do you think is the, you know, difference between being a CTO for anything, any startup, and being a CTO for a cybersecurity company?
sure. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple categories. I mean, I think within B2B software, security has a couple other attributes. So, um, well, first of all, I guess actually, yeah, to your point, I am dual hatted. I'm effectively a CISO at the very least and a CTO. And so every part of our business, I think it's cultural at the end of the day is like how you build secure infrastructure, how you build secure software. That is on me as a leader to help our team be successful. So it's culturally, as a team, we care about security a lot and how we build our software, how we um, deploy our infrastructure. So that's embedded within this is like you're kind of a double hat, at all times. Um, I do think the security space, in some of our business, it feels like we're kind of like a data company. We have a lot of data ingestion, which I think is different than, certain other SaaSes where you're kind of, you have your SaaS, people click buttons, everything's okay. Um, so I think we're becoming a data ingestion company, which architecturally is different than I think some of the simpler SaaSes. But I think the primary thing is, yeah, we're just everything is security oriented, right? And it's expected of our customers, especially when you're selling to a security team or an IT team. They don't skip the security questionnaire, Um, it would be great if they did, but they don't. And they honestly just, they're trusting you with their reputation. And so there's a lot of trust building between us and our customers. And I think in the CTO role, especially, I'm there to help communicate to our customers how important their data is to us, how important them trusting us is, and how, here's all the thousand things we do to show evidence that, we're doing the things we talk about. I try to show instead of tell. Um, and I think that's different than, if you're making your CTO for an app making for designers or something. It's like, they're, you just have different priorities. And so for me, yeah, it is security is embedded in everything. At the same time, we're still a, startup, venture backed. We got to move really fast. It's one of those tensions. It's a tension to both be growth oriented and how what's the fastest we can go as a team. At the same time, a security incident can ruin our company. So, I try to think of that of architecturally as well as like how do we limit the blast radius? How do we isolate systems? And so there's a lot of kind of architectural stuff that I think goes into that to even if there ever is an incident, it's very limited impact, which I think is different than if you're just going as fast as you possibly can. You'll just put everything in MongoDB and see how it goes.
Yeah, true. Now, because you mentioned this now, Paul, the question just popped up in my head. Now, cybersecurity, and I will let you know where I'm trying to go with this. Cybersecurity is, from one side, it's very hot, for venture capitalists or any
Hmm.
investor out there. But from the other side as well, and you need to move fast, as you said. From the other side, it's a crowded market. So it's like a business, but plus tech. Mixed question, I would say. How you see, like the position in the market and the right messaging and the right product and the right, I would say, team plays a
Hmm.
role in taking your offering. And in my opinion, all cybersecurity products are important. Like there's nothing you can say, oh, like this is good to have. all of them actually they fill some
Yeah.
hole in the castle that we're trying to protect. But how do you balance this? Because from one side you have competition, from one side you have other people trying to take your pie, actually,
Yeah.
for piece over there. So how do you manage all this pressure from market, from investors, when you are in a cybersecurity startup?
Yeah. So I think, a word that gets thrown around a lot is product market fit. And I think specifically though, I think people sometimes gloss over it, but I think it's really important to both have product fit and market fit. So you can have an amazing product, but if you can't communicate to the right buyer, the market has to be there for it to be an effective fit. Like you could build an amazing product, but if you have to convince 10,000 people in a company that it's cool before they can buy it, it's actually not a great market. And so I think that's one of the issues sometimes in security is you can build an amazing technology, but you have to be able to find preferably one person in the company of any business that can say, yes, I want to buy that thing. And yes, it's critical to my job that I buy that thing tomorrow. So you have to have that urgency. And I think sometimes, especially with CTOs like me, like technical founders, we go after the problem. And we're like, we're going to make a product that solves that problem. But if you don't figure out who you're selling it to, you're going to have a hard time. And you're going to have a hard time as you get bigger. You might have some great initial demos, but until you figure out who you're selling to and how that one person can have urgency and say, I want to buy that thing tomorrow, that's really the critical part in my mind, especially for cybersecurity. I think the other side of this is, at least for ConductorOne, how we go about it is we are extremely customer centric. I would say we listen to our customers obsessively. It's a cultural element to our company that we take their feedback. We're passionate about making them successful. I think something I'm really proud of is, you know, we don't have shelfware customers. We Everyone gets deployed successfully, and that is like critical to our company. And it's not just something that the customer success team cares about. The entire engineering org, we devote significant resources to, customer X, whether it's a bug or they're missing a feature, like they deployed something on-prem, they have a weird use case. We're still going to go out of our way to make them successful. And I think that kind of customer obsession is one of our ways that we kind of differentiate in the market. There's a lot of shelfware in cybersecurity where people buy it out of fear and a good demo. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of cool products out there that can show you all the things wrong in your company. But if you can't deploy it, it's just going to get ripped out in 2 years. And so for us, that's like our passion is just customer focused. And whatever. Amazon says that too. They're customer obsessed, but I do think in cybersecurity, it's a differentiator to just say, we're going to do whatever we can to make our customers successful.
100%. And I like always this approach from any company, whether in cybersecurity space or not, because you're solving a problem to them. And I believe, like I was checking, the list of your customers. It's like really decent. You have like some public reference
Mhm.
of big companies, and I'm sure like these guys they have seen like the add-on value. And this is brings me to, because usually people when they take decisions they like to see tangible results, and in
Mhm.
cybersecurity it's not always easy to, I mean, to measure it in dollar value maybe, but you can measure it in something else. So how do you approach this, Paul?
We approach actually, honestly, in our sales process, we walk our prospects, potential customers through what we call a business value. Um, it sounds silly even for a startup to do that. It's maybe something you expect from Microsoft or something, but like it's really important to us to communicate the value. And honestly, the way we communicate most of our value is, yes, there's an awareness thing of kind of insurance policy stuff. That's really ambiguous. What hard numbers though come down to automation, or hey, previously, every time you hired someone or you fired someone or to do an access review, it took thousands of hours across your organization. When you ask every manager in the company to justify their employees' access. You could measure how long that takes as a business, the amount of kind of spent time on things. And then when you turns out you need to revoke, 200 groups, who's doing that work? How long does it take them? So to the point earlier, kind of about discussing automation, that's actually where we anchor a lot of our business value is, hey, this is a third of someone's job or multiple people's jobs. You want them doing higher value stuff in IT. Don't have them wasting time on this. Like we can give you a product for a reasonable price that, saves you, weeks or months of someone's time. And that's really where we anchor business value. It's just fundamentally actually the automation part of this, the workflows on top of visibility.
Hmm. That's great to hear. Um, Paul, also, like, I figured out that you are fan of open source as well.
Yeah.
Um, so where do you see, in general as a CTO and with all this experience, what's the future of open source? Because there's a huge debate sometimes about this topic. And some people, they see it's not fair. Some people, they see no, like it allows, like, and I am fan of open source, honestly.
Yeah.
And, like there are a lot of companies that manage to monetize that model also as well. So, um, where do you see the open source heading with all this noise, around us?
Yeah. Um, I think what's hard. So in my context there, there's a generation of startups and businesses that started with one premise that we're going to license software under a very liberal license. And then, a decade later, in some cases, or, around that time, they're extremely popular. And then they, for various reasons, which is totally fine, they've chosen to change their license. That to me is really challenging because one of the pillars of open source in my mind is community and having people outside your business interested in your software. It's part of being in that community. And when you change the license like that, it's actually a betrayal of why people contribute to that community. And so that to me is very challenging. I think, you know, going forward, I hope if you're a startup today, starting a new company and there are other licenses out there that aren't necessarily true open source, but they're source available. If you start from day zero with that license and you're clear with your community, this is how we're going to make our source code available. I have no problem with that at all. And that to me makes total sense. I just think it's really challenging when you've been telling people something for 10 years and then you kind of walk away from it. It's like hard on communities. And, um, the Terraform case is a poignant one right now. There's an open TF foundation that, or, is going to try to take it to the CNCF. I think that, one of the outcomes is you're going to have forks of some of these the software to stay in kind of an open source license. Um, but at the end of the day, it is, whoever owns the software is their choice. It's the same way. It's like the same way the license allows me to build a competitor, right? Like it's okay for someone to choose to kind of make a more restrictive license. I struggle with the community part of it. It's like the people I had dinner with, at OSCon, like they're no longer really open source. And that to me is just kind of weird. It's like you're leaving that community, and that's kind of a bummer at some level. I wish there was a better, I'll say, business model or way they can continue to scale their businesses and still be part of like an open source community. But I just don't see it happening right now. And it doesn't mean it's not bad for open source, by the way. This is like the craziest thing about open source. I've been in it, 20 plus years is like, it's just really, really big, like 20 years ago, there were like a couple thousand people in open source, like people talk about like GitHub, how fast GitHub has grown or something. It's like the pyramid of like number of people in open source is just exponentially bigger than it was 20 years ago. And I actually think that's really amazing. You think about like as humanity, we invented a way to share knowledge. And one of those ways is this open source thing. And it's bigger than it's ever been. And that's great. And so I think at some level, I'm like concerned about how businesses interact with this. But at another level, like if you're a young kid today, you can actually see how systems work and it's all open, it's all in GitHub. Like, that's amazing. Like, when I was a kid, like, yes, there was Linux, but like 90% of the other software out there, even cool hip software, was not open source. You had no idea what was going on. And so I don't know, as the technologist, the kid in me is like, we're still in a great spot as a society. There's a lot of open source, a lot of open things. Um, so it's okay. It's just remember the pyramid's really big. It's not like there's only like 3 software projects in the world.
Yeah, that's like it resonates with me because from one side, I think even if someone fall and build their own products, that's fine with me because still, there's a community. As long there's a community that still taking care
Yeah,
of that project, and I can understand like people needs also to generate some some source of income, by doing this
totally.
stuff, right? So I don't, but the only thing that would piss me off if someone goes and shut down a project and to make it completely, open source. And one of the best thing that I ever saw, companies who managed to have both models simultaneously somehow.
Yeah,
Um, like having a community edition, which is kind of a open source one, and having another edition which is it has the
right.
licenses, it has, and I think it worked well for them, and they proved themselves on the long run. um Shifting again, Paul, to startups, and you mentioned about the product market fit and then the buyer fit as well.
Right.
So with all the experience, because you started many companies, and this is for fellow startup founders who are listening to us, whether they are in cybersecurity or anything else, what piece of advice you would give them?
I would say, look, patience, persistence, um, and, a little bit stick to your intuition. There's a balance there, like, I think being very customer centric, but still stick to your intuition a little bit. And it takes time, you know, um, any startup you see out there that's making headlines and, having their IPO parties or what, there's no IPOs right now, but whatever, these big high flying successful startups, go read about when they started. And they all started 10, 15 years ago. It is a long journey. And, the way I talk about even our team is, let's make the whole company 1% better this week and do that again next week and every following week. It's a stacking wins, is how I think you build a great company. So I think that to me is just like persistence, persistence. You're going to have good weeks. You're going to have bad weeks. You just got to stay in the game. And if every week your company is just a little bit better and you stack those for a long time, you end up with a good company. And that's hard. Like, but people burn out. It's hard. It's not trivial, but you know, take vacations too. And that's the other thing I think, as I've done more startups and everything else, like I'm better about, I'm going to take my 2 week off vacation and be in the forest, and that helps me kind of reset every year and be ready to keep going. So
Mhm.
it is a long game, is I guess the real message.
It's a long game indeed. And I think also they need to accept sometime that they need to pivot, they need to try multiple things until they succeed, right?
Oh
So
yeah.
yeah, so it's a long journey.
Well,
And yeah, please go ahead.
the pivot thing is, I think you got to center around learning. Like, even if you're working with a prospect or someone who might buy your current thing, you just got to learn as much as possible, like from them. What are the problems they're facing? You know, if they could, ask them if you could wave a magic wand and fix anything in your business, what would it be? And like, you probably want to build the thing in their first or second idea right there, right? Like, if you're the 40th problem they want to solve, it's still going to be hard, right? And so I think that's part of it is like, be persistent, always be learning, always be talking to people, and you'll find your thing.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, 100% about this. Yeah, it's like, I had another guest and said, like, also don't rush uh, implementing features, because just it was Joe, like, who I
Yeah,
interviewed 2 weeks back. So yeah, like, you need to prioritize things and make this balance all over there. So 100% on this. Paul, like, where people can find, of course, I'll put all these links. I have them, but just, for you to mention where they can find about you and about your company.
sure. So, I mean, I have an X account if anyone still uses that. Querna, of course.
I do.
But yeah, yeah. Um, but it's ConductorOne, conductorone.com. We're very visible on all the socials, ConductorOne, all those things. On LinkedIn, we post things there pretty often. We do have a company like podcast to cross with that for a second called All Aboard, where we interview a lot of kind of cybersecurity leaders in various forms and function, talking a lot about these identity problems and what they're doing in their business to figure out how to address them, because they're complex problems and they're not things you can always solve in a one-day deployment. So it's always a good time to talk to those people.
Yeah, that's great. Paul, anything I missed to ask you?
No, this is great. I think we hit a lot of different topics. That's great.
Yeah, so I asked this final question just in case, maybe because you wanted to say something, or my guests want to say something. So I asked this question. It's not a tricky one, guys, by the way. People
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
I try to trick the guests, but no, it's just to open a window in case myself I missed something during the preparation. Well, Paul, thank you very much for being with me today. I think you enlightened a lot of CISOs and even people interested in cybersecurity and fellow entrepreneurs today with your words. So thank you very much for being on the show. And as usual, this is how I end my episodes. If you have any questions about this, episode, or, the show in general, if you have questions to Paul also, you can feel free to reach out to me and I will forward that to him as well. Keep the feedbacks coming. I'm enjoying reading them. We're trying to make a, mix of topics. So I'm not jumping. I'm trying to, as much as possible, to squeeze all the topics from cybersecurity, deep tech, and all the other uh, functionalities of technology, plus, of course, startup/entrepreneurship with everything related there. So whether it's marketing, sales, and all this stuff. Thank you so much, Paul, for being here today again. And thank you for the audience for tuning in. And we'll meet again next episode. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Hit that subscribe button, share the show with your tech-savvy friends and fellow entrepreneurs, and leave us a review on your favorite podcast app. Your support means the world to us.